Okay, just a reminder, this is British and American culture. This is sort of an addition, or it's not an addition. Actually, what our last, the last lecture online was an addition. This is more of a review. So, the last we talked about how the English Civil War sort of maps on top of the American Revolutionary War. A lot of people who didn't fit in to English society left, and they ended up in America. This is not something that Korea could do, or many countries have been able to do, but this is a fundamental aspect of the relationship between British culture and American culture, and the fact that American culture exists, period, is that over this benign neglect period that we've been talking about, which overlaps with the English Civil War and so all the problems we talked about, sovereignty, financial problems, these prevent the United Kingdom, which isn't the United Kingdom until 1707. So only halfway through this period, we end up with British culture going forward. But the Scottish are not part of that beforehand. It's English, right? Until halfway through this period where over 150 years or so, the colonies start to develop themselves, and the identity that they come up with is a product of, a lot of it is religion, a lot of it is ethnic, but they all sort of have, as the states do now, they have some things in common, and they have some things that are different. This is, as we go forward, you're going to see the reason that we're talking about doing an assignment about contradictions is that there's so many differences, and some of them seem like they're opposites, and yet they're in the same country. So sometimes I think it's helpful to kind of think of Europe, right? You've got Poland, and you've got Hungary, and you've got Spain, and you've got, well, the United Kingdom is kind of not, I mean, that was one of the sort of different, cultures and political systems and whatever. Switzerland using their own money. They've got, it's a federation. It's an organization of 50 countries. Coincidentally, there are 50 states in the United States. So Europe and all of Europe together and America as it stands now, it are sort of comparable. Extremes of temperature, Southern Europe is right next to Africa, and Northern Europe is right next to the Arctic Circle, right? They got Russia on the east and the Atlantic Ocean on the west. The United States is a very diverse geography and a very diverse population and a very diverse culture. So talking about British culture and American culture together is kind of a difficult thing, because it would be easier probably to compare Europe and America rather than the United States as it is now. But that's part of the reason that I like the way I've designed this class, is to give you the background, because really there's the values, there's the issues and the values of the American values sort of come out of the problems of the state that develops in the 16th and 17th century, which we talked about. So you end up with champions of those things. Benjamin Franklin is a inventor. He's a champion of education. He doesn't go to Harvard. He's a sort of self-taught, experimenter, inventor. He loves France, foreign policy, like all of these things sort of mixed together in these people, and these guys end up being sort of experts in their proper domains. So when you look at in chapter 4, when you read about Benjamin Franklin, you can see he's really good at pretty much everything. He's the guy I think most people would be jealous of, because it doesn't matter what class you put him in, he's gonna just excel at that. George Washington is the quintessential sort of British gentleman soldier, but then he doesn't have an opportunity to be promoted or get the office that he's looking for, and as a consequence, he becomes the general of the American Continental Army, partly because he says I'm going to do it for free, and partly because of his experience, and partly because of his disillusionment that he can't become a high-ranking officer in the British Army, and he's one of the richest. There's another contradiction. We're going to talk about contradictions after the quiz. George Washington is simultaneously one of the richest people in North America, and also he's deeply in debt. This is, I hate to say it, but Donald Trump, we don't know exactly how much money he has. We know he has money and he has power, and we also know he has a lot of debt. And quite frankly, not Benjamin Franklin, but George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, a lot of these plantation owners, like the value of their plantations. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson have slaves. They have a lot of them, hundreds of them, right? And this is the big thing, that when Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, it gets checked by all the people, and most of the people who sign are slave owners, and so anything that is anti-slavery that's in that document gets removed, and you end up with slavery being an institution that's accepted everywhere. And then after the United States sort of stabilizes, and it takes a while, state by state, the North bans slavery. They don't need it. Part of the reason is they don't need it. They're industrializing and they do not need slaves. They can pay people less money than it costs to buy a slave. If you buy a slave and you give them shoes and you clothe them and you feed them, that's more expensive than paying somebody 1 penny a day to make a shirt. You know what I mean? So it's like, there is a question there about what is the worst state. A good master treating their slaves properly, and giving them the equipment that they need, and this is not common though. Let me put this. I'm not arguing that slavery is a good thing ever, because fundamentally it's an infringement of freedom. So if freedom is the most important thing, which is the American sort of value, that everybody considers the most important. If freedom is the most important thing, then slavery, the other discussions and the other elements of slavery don't matter. However, if you're basically talking about survival and quality of life, there are examples of slaves being in conditions that are better than sweatshops or like, exploitive labor in factories, because I worked in a factory and it was not exploitive, thank God, but it still was terrible nonetheless. So you have to consider the slavery issue is big. It's the big issue that will not go away and will not stop affecting Americans until it continues into now. The result of displacing people and neglecting them or segregating them or sidelining them, for generations and generations, means that it's very generally it's very unlikely that they will go from poverty to wealth like a Michael Jordan or a Michael Jackson or an Allen Iverson. I'm using sports examples because those are the ones that are most familiar to me, but singers too, Snoop Dogg, whatever. There's no chance that they're gonna grow up in a rough neighborhood that's dangerous and has no public support or safety, and then when they're 50 years old, they're gonna be the ambassador of America to the Paris Olympics. Snoop Dogg is a great example. Great music. I'm a big fan, so I encourage you to listen to Snoop Dogg's music. But I mean, it's just amazing for me to see. It's like it's great, and it's not enough. That's all. He has overcome so many things that he's sort of like a shining star. But like the problem with the shining stars is it's for most people it's not attainable. You can't be that. It's like Aladdin too. There's only one diamond in the rough. All the other poor people can't do what Aladdin does, but Aladdin overcomes everything, and he becomes the sultan because he marries the princess. But what about the other 10 million people? So Benjamin Franklin, first of all, Benjamin Franklin, the $100 bill, that's what he deserves. It's all about the Benjamins. Unfortunately, Puff Daddy has a bad reputation now, but that is a good song that I used to listen to when I was young. $100 bill is a Benjamin. He's, I told you already, he's the most respected person. He's multi-talented. He's a polyglot. He's a Renaissance man. He's good at everything. He's intelligent. He speaks multiple languages. He loves France. He might have been the reason or the biggest part of the reason that the French helped the Americans fight against the British, and as a consequence, America won the war. If France doesn't jump in, America loses. I think that's the consensus. If you want to argue with me, do your research. I don't think that any of you are going to do that. But no Benjamin Franklin, no France, then doesn't matter. So Benjamin Franklin is he's the most important factor. Most respected, attempts to negotiate with the British Empire, can't do it. As a consequence, he says, okay, I'm I'm with the rebels. We're going to separate. I'm going to France, and I'm going to get France to help us. And that's what happens. When France helps, the British realize that they can't fight France and the United States at the same time. And they'd rather fight the French. Sorry if you're from France. I don't think we have any French students right now in this class, but I mean, that's the outcome, is that France is a greater danger than the United States potential. The 13 colonies are less of a danger than France taking over the Caribbean or invading England. So they have to make sure France can't, take anything from it. And as a consequence, they have to surrender to the British. They have to surrender to George Washington. So George Washington, he never told a lie. That's false. He did. He never got angry. Of course he got angry. He's a glorified, leader. He had no teeth. His teeth were fake. And they weren't as good as mine. I have a veneer right here. But in 1770, they didn't have that kind of technology. So it's almost like, he's almost like a pirate. He's got like wooden, and if you're rich, gold kind of studs. What he sounded like when he talked, I have no idea. But all the pictures are probably not. He probably doesn't look nearly as handsome and impressive as any of the romantic paintings. When he retires from being president, he basically says, "I can't see, I'm tired, I need to go home." He's done 2 terms as president, and that becomes the rule eventually, that you're only allowed to be president twice. But it's partly because they wanted him to be president forever, but he was like, "I'm too tired." He's kind of the opposite of Donald Trump in that sense. Because Donald Trump was like, "I'm going to keep going," but he just wanted to go back to his plantation. And when he retired and he died, he was in Virginia, and he gave all of his property and his slaves away, which is sort of a typical, behavior of rich Americans to redeem themselves. They may have done bad things during their life, but in the end, they gave back to the next generation. And George Washington is one of the major original trendsetters in that sense, because he used his slaves his entire life, hundreds of them, but when he died, he let them go. Thomas Jefferson, I don't like him at all. He's got a pretty cleaned up reputation. The best thing about him, and the only thing I really want you to know, is he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was very good at writing. He was a lawyer, but he made all his money from his slaves. And his wife died, and he promised that he would never marry anybody again. But he had lots of girlfriends, including a slave. And he had children with that slave, who was herself only half a slave. So his children and his grandchildren were a quarter or 1/8 slave, descended from slaves, and he didn't set them free. So here's a contradiction for the ages. Is Thomas Jefferson a good guy? I'm going to say definitely not. Like, I don't care how well you write. It's, you say what you want, let's see what you do. And what he does is behave like, I'm not saying he was harmful or hurtful or abusive as a slave owner, but he didn't set his slaves free, even his girlfriend, even his children. He's really tall. He wasn't a great speaker. So the most important thing you need to remember is he's a hypocrite, and He wrote the Declaration of Independence. After the main legacy of the, the Declaration and the subsequent Treaty of Paris in 1783, 84, is that the United States becomes a country, slavery is legalized, gradually states decide that it's not legal in the North, and then there becomes a divide between states that support slavery and don't. And that's what we're going to get to next, because the real legacy of the Constitution is we have a republic, but taxes are higher and slavery is legal. So you can do it if you're in a state that supports it. But that's the end of the material for quiz number 3. So I'm gonna stop myself there, and we'll go through the 19th century from the beginning to the end until World War I for the next quiz, and then the 20th century up until now is the last part before the exam. Best of luck on the quiz. Remember, you've got experience. Think about the question and carefully choose your answer. A, B, or C, or D, or E. There's 5 choices. And I'll see you on Friday. Thank you for listening.